He invited the maid as a joke, but her stunning entrance left everyone speechless. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Marian Harper sat at her worn kitchen table, the hands of the clock hovering just past 6:42 p.m. The summer heat clung to her blouse like a second skin, and she could almost feel the exhaustion in the fabric. Her hair, the color of pale wheat, was loosely gathered at the nape, wisps escaping to rest on her neck. Across from her, 7-year-old Emma leaned over her notebook, tongue pressed between her teeth as her tiny fingers danced crayons across the page. Occasionally, Marian's gaze slipped to her daughter, both careful and affectionate, a silent promise in every look. Then her eyes drifted back to the envelope lying face up on the table. Embossed in gold was the crest of Hawthorne Holdings, and beneath it the name Marian Harper, a personal invitation, not courtesy, definitely not gratitude. It was an artful snare. She'd been the household manager for Preston Hawthorne for nearly 4 years, quietly slipping through marble halls, leaving silk curtains untouched, brushing footprints off rugs as pristine as his reputation. Not once had she shared more than a few words with him, so when he half smirked, surrounded by his business circle over appetizers, "Marian, why don't you come to the party?" The group chuckled. One even called it charmingly exotic. She'd bowed her head, resumed her duties, until she found the invitation waiting for her at home. No theatrics, just a page stamped with intention. From the corner of her eye, Emma glanced up, little colored smudges on her fingertips. In the notebook was a sketch of a woman in an evening dress. "Is that you, Mama?" she whispered. Marian managed a gentle smile that didn't quite touch her lips. "Maybe," she answered softly. Emma's eyes, steady and knowing beyond. Her years said everything. That look, quiet and unfiltered, stung with responsibility. Marian tucked the envelope into a drawer, rose, knelt to brush Emma's hair. "Mom just needs to think." Emma studied her face and nodded. She already understood. Marian returned to her routine the next days, arriving before sunrise, cleaning the grand house in silence, melting into the background. Preston never mentioned it again. Vivian Sinclair pretended not to notice. Other staff whispered behind closed doors, but dared not speak. And at night, Marian sifted through old photographs and boxes in her closet, finally unearthing a champagne-colored gown she'd tucked away 8 years before. Hugh's parting gift. Its silk shimmered faintly in the lamplight, and a spark of something long buried rekindled. On Saturday morning, she and Emma took public transit to a small alteration shop in Evanston, where seamstress Gloria smiled as she worked the waistline. "You'll stun them," she said with soft certainty. Marian touched the fabric. "I just want him to see me." That afternoon, Marian dropped Emma with their neighbor, smoothed her own waves into place, and applied delicate makeup. She slipped, earrings, tiny heirlooms from her mother, and stepped out in tailored confidence. The train and bus ride were usual rhythms, but at the wrought iron gate of Preston Hawthorne's estate, the usual hush shifted. No valet stopped. No guard acknowledged her. She walked through the doorway, head held high. Vivian was the first to register her, mid-conversation. Glass paused. The champagne-colored gown swayed with Marian's calm elegance, and her hair framed her face with a serenity that spoke louder than couture. Vivian forced a precise smile. "Good evening," she purred. "May I help you?" Marian slipped, a hand from her clutch, revealing the invitation. "I'm here on this." Vivian scanned its seal, then looked at Marian. After a breath, she stepped aside. With quiet resolve, Marian crossed into the candle-lit grand hall, her presence unwritten. But noticed, no introduction, no spotlight, just her. Every head turned. Conversations hesitated mid-phrase. The gown skimmed her form. Her hair caught the light as if choreographed. And though the room bristled with opulence and feigned ease, hers was an honesty no facade could match. She felt their eyes, some curious, some critical, some shamed, but above everything else she felt herself, fully alive, fully seen. The party was at full tilt. Glasses clinked with rhythmic precision, music filled the hall without restraint, and the laughter came a little too loud, a little too rehearsed. Everything about the evening had been engineered to dazzle. Lighting, ambiance, attire, conversation. But when Marion Harper stepped through the grand entrance without hesitation, a current shifted. The crowd, once magnetized toward the chandeliers and central displays, scattered its attention in waves, as if jolted awake. Her dress, light in color and gentle in movement, didn't shimmer. It didn't need to. What held them wasn't the fabric, but the quiet certainty in the way she moved. She wasn't presenting herself. She was simply arriving whole. Two servers halted mid-step. Recognition swept across their faces like a silent admission. The same woman who'd polished silverware and wiped down baseboards for years now stood before them as if she'd never done anything else. One instinctively dropped his gaze, not out of shame, but as if the truth he'd overlooked had suddenly taken shape. A cluster of women nearby giggled, but their tone lacked ease. Short, nervous bursts. Yet as Marion walked closer, unhurried and unworried, the expression stiffened. She didn't glare, she didn't retaliate, she simply occupied her place, her path. That quiet dignity made every other gesture in the room feel exaggerated by contrast. She didn't demand attention. She made it impossible to look away. Near the bar, Preston Hawthorne had paused mid-conversation, drink forgotten in hand. He'd approved her invitation half-mockingly, assuming she'd never come. But now, standing under the polished lighting, she looked nothing like the image he'd carried of her, and exactly like the woman he'd somehow never seen. Champagne dress flowing just enough, hair loose with care, eyes calm as still water. Eleanor Reed moved toward him slowly, wineglass in hand, voice low. "So that's the joke of the night?" she asked, not sarcastic, only curious. "Strange. You're the only one not laughing now." She drifted away. Marion passed close by, the faintest scent of rose and citrus trailing after her. It wasn't the perfume that turned heads. It was the unfamiliar certainty in how she wore herself. Preston took a breath and crossed the room without a plan. He reached her side, spoke just above the music. "You look different." Marion turned to him, gaze direct but not confrontational. "I'm the same. Maybe you're finally seeing what's always been there." His reply caught in his throat. No witticism surfaced, no witty retort came to save him. She was already walking away, her pace steady as she stopped at the dessert table. Two teenagers with phones stumbled backward after brushing against her arm. One stared, wide-eyed. "Don't you work here?" Marion smiled gently. "I do, just not tonight." And then she moved on, leaving them and many others, grappling with a new version of someone they never really knew. Vivian Sinclair, weaving between guests with a grin that rarely met her eyes, sensed the shift. The gathering wasn't orbiting her anymore. She leaned into a smaller group, voice pitched with casual cruelty. She certainly made an effort, didn't she? But the jab didn't land. A woman in a sleek black dress, her grey hair pinned into an elegant twist, didn't flinch. She watched Marion and replied plainly, "That's not effort, that's essence." Vivian's jaw tightened. She turned away. The evening she'd curated so meticulously had tilted, centered now on someone who wasn't meant to be noticed, someone who refused to disappear. Out on the balcony, the warm breeze carried traces of lake air and city light shimmer. Marion stood quietly, away from the party's vibrations. Behind her, the music played on. Conversations continued, but the noise seemed farther away now. She wasn't basking in attention or relishing vindication. She was breathing freely. Her thoughts wandered to Emma, to the colored drawing left, on the bed, to the way her daughter had looked at her earlier. That's why she was here. Not for Preston, not for whispers or gasps, but for herself, for the version of her that had long been muted beneath layers of necessity. There was nothing left to chase, no applause to wait for, just the woman she was and the peace of finally standing still in her own presence. The music didn't stop, but it shifted. The tempo of the evening, once precise and rehearsed, took on a new pulse after Marian's arrival. Conversations pressed forward, glasses continued to rise, but the laughter lost its confidence. Some guests clung to poise out of habit, others watched from behind a veneer of indifference, and among them, Preston Hawthorne stood still, eyes following Marian like someone watching a truth unfold, one he should have seen long ago. She hadn't transformed, she hadn't been styled. The woman crossing the ballroom now was the same one who'd walked his halls with lowered eyes for years. The only difference was that this time, she was meeting every gaze head-on. Preston moved through the crowd with no clear intent. He found her by the tall window, glass in hand, her hair catching the light in soft motion against her shoulders. He stopped a few feet away, unsure if she'd notice. She did. Slowly, Marian turned to him, meeting his eyes not with confrontation, but with a calm that unraveled any need for defense. No sarcasm, no scorn, just a presence that made words unnecessary. Preston considered speaking, but silence had already carved out more truth than anything he could say. She didn't rush to fill the void. He didn't try to fix it. He simply stood there, taking in the woman he had never really looked at until now. Elsewhere in the room, Vivian Sinclair moved from group to group, her usual control slipping. Marian wasn't following the script. She wasn't retreating, wasn't retaliating, wasn't explaining herself. And that absence of performance was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. Near a column by the bar, Eleanor Reed observed in quiet calculation. Her eyes moved between Preston, Vivian, and the silent current running through the space. When she approached Marian, she didn't offer pleasantries or praise, just handed her a fresh glass of sparkling wine. If you want out, I'll drive you home. But if you want to stay, just know you're making a lot of people uncomfortable, and sometimes that's exactly the point. Marian took the glass. I'm not here to shake anyone. Just needed to remind myself who I am. Eleanor smiled faintly. You've done that, and you reminded the rest of us too. Whispers ignited in small corners. She looks different. What changed? Is this some kind of stunt? By the terrace, a knot of businessmen leaned in, one with a polished cufflink glinting. Under the chandeliers muttered, "It's compelling but dangerous. People who walk tall after a lifetime looking down. They're the ones who upset the balance." Another chuckled, half dismissive, "She's just a maid who decided to dress up." But the laugh trailed off as Marian neared the musicians. She gave a subtle gesture, and the pianist, momentarily confused, slid off the bench. No one understood what she was doing until her fingers touched the keys. The ballroom froze. A delicate melody, slow and achingly intimate, drifted into the air. No spotlight, no announcement, just music that didn't demand attention. It earned it. Glasses remained suspended, conversations faded into breath, and Preston didn't move. He listened, caught in a sound that felt like a memory he never had. The notes told a story too quiet to explain, but too honest to ignore. When the final chord dissolved into silence, the room didn't react. It just paused. Still. Changed. Marian stood, nodded to the band with a quiet thank you, and turned to walk. She moved with the same steady composure as before, but something was different now. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't drama, it was clarity. As she passed Preston, she paused just enough to meet his eyes. Her voice was steady, her words sharp as truth. Don't expect me tomorrow. I'm done. She didn't linger for a reaction, didn't wait for approval or regret. She walked toward the exit, and with each step, she left behind not just the room, but the version of herself the world had chosen not to see. Until now. The morning came without headlines or alarm, but something in the city felt different. It wasn't the weather nor the news cycle. The shift began quietly, in private group chats, where a video recorded without permission started to circulate. Within hours, it had made its way to every corner of social media. No captions, no edits, just Marion Harper at the piano. Her champagne dress traced her silhouette with understated elegance, her hair soft over her shoulders and her hands gliding across the keys with gentle command. In the frame behind her, Preston Hawthorne stood frozen, as if the moment had peeled. Something from him. The video didn't need commentary. It told its story in silence, one that pierced deeper than any speech. And the comments came in waves. Elegance isn't about status. She silenced an entire room with nothing but truth. She's everything we hope to be when no one believes in us. Inside the Hawthorne Group's headquarters, unease hung thick. The PR department scrambled to understand the scale of what was happening. Mentions began showing up in lifestyle columns, business newsletters, and online op-eds. Some employees watched the clip on their phones in whispered huddles. Preston's profile was unmistakable in the background, and slowly pieces began to click. That woman, the one commanding millions of views, was the housekeeper. The one people had seen in glimpses, escorting Emma quietly at internal receptions, holding paper programs no one offered to her. She had never belonged to the corporate structure, but now she was everywhere. Was this planned? Is it part of a new diversity initiative? Is this marketing? No one had answers, and maybe that's why the truth, raw, uncoached, and unapproved, hit the hardest. Vivian Sinclair moved quickly. She reached out to a few trusted journalists and seeded the narrative. Marion's presence at the party had been orchestrated as part of a corporate rebranding effort. It was nothing but strategy. In less than a day, the angle caught fire. Headlines began suggesting that the piano moment was part of a carefully curated campaign, that Marion had been selected in advance to play a role. The authenticity that had moved millions began to crumble under suspicion. Doubts surfaced. Some accused her of exploiting the situation. Others said she'd been paid to perform a transformation. From his office, Preston watched the story twist itself into something ugly. He scrolled through the headlines, read every comment, called Marion, once, then again and again. No answer. The short message he sent stayed unread, and he sat there, unsure if silence was punishment or protection. It was Eleanor Reed who stepped in to break the spin. Upon learning what Vivian had circulated, she called an emergency meeting with the company's communications leadership. Calm, collected, and with her usual sharp focus, she sat at the head of the table and spoke before anyone else could. The claim that this was a coordinated PR move is false and dangerous. Someone tried to interject, but she continued. Marion was never an employee of the firm. She worked in Preston's private residence, and she came to the party because she was invited. It may have been a joke at her expense, but her presence wasn't staged. What happened that night was real, unfiltered, and no one here has the right to turn it into a convenient lie. The room fell silent. The communications director cleared his throat. But if Preston doesn't speak publicly, Eleanor turned to him. Then it's time he does. Now. Upstairs, Preston remained in his office, phone in hand, the piano melody looping in the background. He'd lost count of how many times he'd replayed the video. Each time, it pressed harder into him. How wrong he'd been, how blind, how small in the face of what he'd tried to mock. The persona he'd built over years, measured, untouchable, suddenly felt hollow. He walked to the window, saw nothing, just his reflection. And it was in that moment, finally, that he made the decision he'd avoided all morning. He summoned his personal team, wrote a brief statement, scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m. the next day. No scripts, no buffers, no spin. When Losai asked if he was sure, he replied simply, "No, but it's the least I owe." On his desk, untouched, was the envelope he'd once sent Marion as a joke. Now, it sat there as a reminder of what needed undoing and what couldn't be taken back. The press conference had been scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 8:30, the sidewalk outside Hawthorne Group headquarters was already crowded with reporters, news crews, and passers-by. Satellite vans lined both sides of the avenue, and employees pressed against the upper floor windows for a view. It wasn't a corporate merger, no quarterly update, no media rollout. This was the first time Preston Hawthorne had summoned the press without a business agenda, and that alone stirred speculation. He'd given no previews, no bullet points, only said he had something to say. And when he entered the auditorium, wearing an open-collared shirt and carrying a single gold-trimmed envelope bearing his family's crest, it became clear this was no ordinary address. He walked to the podium, set the envelope down, and paused. Not for theatrics, but to search the room for the courage he hadn't quite mustered. "Last week," he began, steady but quiet, "I made a mistake." A hush fell over the space. "I invited a woman to a private event at my home, not out of respect, not out of recognition, out of boredom and arrogance." A ripple moved through the crowd, but Preston stood firm. "Her name is Marion Harper." And not only did she show up, she stood there, looked every one of us in the eye, and reminded us all that dignity doesn't require wealth, a title, or an invitation offered in sincerity. The murmurs faded into full silence. Every camera lens found his face. And me? I tried to laugh. Then I tried to pretend it didn't matter, but the truth is, that night turned me inside out. He opened the envelope slowly, drawing out the original invitation. Holding it up, he let the cameras capture every inch. This was meant as a provocation, a small, careless gesture from someone who thought himself above others. He laid the card flat on the podium. Today, it becomes something else, a request for reparation, for recognition. He exhaled, less a performance, more a private reckoning made public. "Marion, if you're watching this, I'm not inviting you to another party. I'm inviting you to help build something real. A program for women like you, for single mothers, for the unseen and unheard, for those who carry far more than mop buckets and scrub brushes. No buzzwords, no slogans, just truth." The media scrambled to capture every word. Within minutes, clips of the speech dominated online platforms. Quotes turned into headlines. Threads bloomed with reactions. A real apology that doesn't try to explain itself away. She said nothing, and somehow he finally understood. But what truly stunned the public wasn't the apology, it was the offer. Preston announced the launch of a social equity division within the Hawthorne Group, complete with its own budget and leadership structure. The goal, to empower women often overlooked by corporate frameworks, not as mascots, but as voices with power. And I want Marion at that table, not for show, but to lead, because she's lived the things we only debate on slides. Across the city, Marion sat on the edge of her couch. Emma curled at her side, still half asleep. She didn't smile, didn't cry. She just listened, every word, as if needing to make sure they were meant for her. When the screen went dark, she didn't move right away. Her apartment hadn't changed, but something in the way she sat did. She had gone to the party for herself, and now the world had seen what she'd spent years forgetting. Her value had never lived in anyone's title. It lived in the way she carried herself through rooms that didn't welcome her. When Emma stirred and asked, "Are you going back there?" Marion answered softly, "Not to that house, but maybe somewhere else." Back at the office, Preston's leadership team gathered behind closed doors to review next steps. Eleanor Reed stood near the window, arms crossed, watching him closely. He wasn't basking. There was no sense of triumph. He looked exhausted, like a man who had finally said something he'd been dragging behind him for too long. When she asked if he thought Marion would respond, he took a long breath. "I don't know. Maybe not. But I had to say it anyway." She nodded, the kind of nod that holds no judgment. Sometimes we speak not to be answered, but because it's time we stopped staying silent. On Preston's phone, Marion's contact remained unopened, but the silence no longer stung. It meant something now, and even without a reply, he could feel the shift. Something had changed, and it wouldn't change back. Marion Harper's return to the Hawthorne Group building came days after the press conference, and without ceremony. No reporters waited, no photographers, no corporate handlers, just a single receptionist, visibly nervous, had been instructed to escort her to the executive floor. Marion wore no heels, no jewelry, no curated look. Just dark tailored slacks, a soft white blouse, and her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. She moved with quiet purpose, not with pride or apology, but with a grounded calm. She knew eyes followed her. Some glanced down, unsure how to face what they'd once overlooked. Others watched with late-blooming respect, but she didn't flinch. She climbed the stairs as if she'd done it every day, even if she had no idea what waited at the top. The meeting room had been set. Bottles of water, a carafe of coffee, a projector already glowing in anticipation of a presentation that might not happen. When Marion entered, Eleanor Reed rose first. She stepped forward with a reserved smile and offered her hand. Marion returned the gesture, firm and steady. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said, clearing a space beside her. A few executives were already seated, posture stiff, tablets open, expressions unreadable. One muttered a greeting. "It's an honor." Marion gave no reply. She sat, opened a plain notebook, and said simply, "I'm here to listen." The phrase, void of pretense or attitude, settled over the room like a reset switch. Eleanor began outlining the proposed structure of the new initiative, but soon turned the floor over to Marion, who took it with clarity, restraint, and precision. As Marion spoke, about mothers juggling shifts with daycare closures, about skipped meals and missed opportunities, about systems designed to exclude, the mood around the table began to shift. It wasn't pity that flickered in their eyes, it was recognition. For many, it was the first time they'd heard these stories from someone who'd actually lived them. Preston Hawthorne wasn't in the room, not because he didn't care, but because he knew this wasn't about him. He'd told his team, if she came, she should be heard, not filtered. Still, when Eleanor texted him, "She's here, and she's ready," he left his office without hesitation. He didn't enter right away. He stood outside the glass wall, watching quietly as she commanded a space that had never been built for her. Then, slowly, he opened the door. Marion looked up when she heard it. It was the first time they'd been in the same room since the night of the party, since the video, since the apology. Preston entered alone. No assistant, no entourage, just a small notebook in his hand. "May I?"
"Sit,"
he asked, with the tone of someone who now understood the room no longer belonged to him. Marion nodded once. He took a chair across from her. Eleanor proposed a short break, and the rest of the group stepped out, leaving them face to face. "I didn't think you'd come," Preston admitted. Marion laid her palms on the notebook. "Neither did I, but this isn't about you or me. It's bigger now, and I'd like to be part of it, on my terms." Her voice carried no resentment, no compromise, just steady resolve. They sat quietly for a few seconds, echoes of the silence they'd once shared near a piano before the world twisted into noise. Preston reached into his notebook and slid an envelope across the table. It wasn't gold, it wasn't sealed, just a plain document, a formal proposal. She'd have authority, staff, budget, no need to use his name, no PR clauses. "It's all there," he said. Marion glanced at it, read a few lines, then closed it again. "I haven't decided if I want my name next to yours yet. That's still open." Preston didn't flinch. He nodded. "Fair, but if you'll let me, I'd like to try and earn it." No push, no pressure. Marion stood, slipping the envelope into her bag. At the door, she looked over her shoulder. "If you're serious about earning anything, start by listening, and then keep listening." Downstairs, a few staff members gathered at the cafe counter, mid-shift. One of them, a janitor in a blue uniform, stepped away from her table when she saw Marion passing. "I saw you in that video," she said. No one had to explain a thing. We all got it. Marion didn't offer a speech. She touched the woman's arm and said, "We're going to shake things up together." Then she stepped outside. No dramatics, no lingering, just the rhythm of her own choosing. The city felt different beyond the glass doors. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't reacting to life. She was directing it. And that was more than enough to begin again. The impact of Marion Harper's official role in the Hawthorne Group's social initiative was immediate. Not because she sought headlines, she didn't, but because her presence alone managed to disturb and inspire in equal measure. Inside the company, the buzz spread quickly. Some welcomed her as a symbol of long overdue change. Others viewed her as a disruption to the familiar structure. Outside the building, in cafes, on podcasts, across social media and academic forums, her name began surfacing with frequency. She turned down interviews, refused magazine covers, declined photo ops for corporate brochures. Still, she appeared in op-eds, sociology lectures, think pieces about labor mobility. A woman once invisible on cleaning schedules now lit up PowerPoint slides in executive workshops. And the noise around her wasn't going away. In reality, Marion's life had changed little. She still rose early, dropped Emma off with the neighbor across the hall, and walked to the office during the hours she'd agreed upon with Eleanor. Her space on the third floor was modest. A small corner office, 2 interns, and a practical budget. Enough to build something tangible. Mornings were spent reviewing training proposals, mapping out feedback from staff in overlooked departments, and meeting one-on-one with janitors, food service workers, maintenance teams. In the afternoons, she met with social workers, non-profit reps and legal advisors. No cameras, no flash, just the slow, steady grind of building from the inside. She avoided the upper floors, where executives swept through with leather briefcases and tight agendas. But once in a while, Preston showed up, not as a boss, more like a man trying to understand what he'd never lived. Their interactions were brief, to the point. He listened more than he spoke. Sometimes he connected her to the right people. Other times he simply stepped back. Marion didn't treat him with hostility, but she didn't lean into familiarity either. Her tone stayed measured, her stance solid. Preston, for his part, seemed pulled between a desire to get closer and an awareness that too much involvement might dilute what she was trying to protect. One afternoon, he caught her deep in conversation with a maintenance worker in the staff cafeteria. He lingered nearby, unsure if he should interrupt. Marion noticed him eventually and said, without breaking stride, "They've always had something to say. They just needed someone to listen." He nodded, then left without a word, as if he understood that silence this time was the right kind of support. But resistance came fast. A handful of senior executives began voicing concerns, not publicly, But through strategic whispers, some questioned her lack of academic credentials, others passed along passive-aggressive remarks in internal emails. Sarcastic comments circulated. At the center of it all was Vivienne Sinclair, whose disdain had merely adapted from a party sneer to a polished boardroom objection. She called it emotional marketing, claimed the company was chasing optics instead of staying on course. No one challenged her outright. But Eleanor noticed the tension building. One afternoon, she pulled Marion aside. "You need to decide if you're staying in this," she said plainly, "and if you're willing to stand your ground." Marion didn't. Pause. "I'm not here to be liked." That same day, she wrote a full report. Proposed actions, quarterly goals, detailed metrics, no theatrics, no flair, just a roadmap. She presented it in the next strategic meeting with the calm authority of someone who'd been overlooked too long to pretend. She didn't pitch. She laid it out. Lived experience turned into measurable change. Preston was there, sitting in the back, silent. But when she finished, he was the first to rise. "Does anyone here have something more grounded and applicable than this?" No one responded. Most looked down, the resistance draining out of them. Marion didn't need to justify her place in the room anymore. She was already the proof. That night, as she walked through downtown with a light step and her phone buzzing in her pocket, Marion ignored the call. Music felt better. She slid her earbuds in, shrugged her coat tighter, and paused outside the storefront where she used to buy cleaning uniforms. Her reflection stared back. Same woman, same face, different posture. She stood straighter. Not because of clothing, but because she'd stopped asking for permission. She moved through the streets with purpose now. When she reached home, Emma was curled on the couch. Marion kissed her forehead, tucked in the blanket, and sat down beside her with a pen and notebook. Not a journal, not a list. It was a draft. Now, of something bigger, a future she wasn't waiting for anymore. She was sketching it, on her own terms. The Hawthorne Group continued to operate with the same unshakable rhythm it always had. Boardrooms remained full, market projections unfolded on digital screens, and Preston Hawthorne didn't miss a single strategic meeting. From the glass-walled offices on the upper floors, global expansions were reviewed, contracts negotiated, and performance metrics recalculated. The corporation still moved with the power of a well-oiled engine. But something had shifted. A new arm, still small, still forming, was beginning to deliver tangible results. Preston kept his distance from the day-to-day work of the initiative. He'd left it in the hands of Eleanor, and through her, Marion. He monitored reports, requested data, but didn't ask for weekly briefings or staged presentations. He trusted the system he'd put in place. And more than that, he trusted what he saw in Marion's eyes: intention. Still, her presence in the building continued to challenge people. Some avoided eye contact when passing her in the hallway. Others pretended nothing had changed, but it had. The stark contrast between who Marion had been and where she now stood seemed to unsettle old comfort zones. Eleanor, on the other hand, made sure she never walked those halls alone when it mattered. She brought Marion to meetings with union reps, non-profit directors, and even corporate partners exploring social initiatives. Marion never claimed the spotlight, but when she spoke, she held the room. No buzzwords, no academic theory, just real life told plainly. Women working two jobs, women who hadn't heard their names spoken with dignity in years. What Marion offered wasn't protest, it was proof. And with each meeting, a new offer came, a new door opened. Change didn't come from branding, it came from truth. Not everyone welcomed that truth. One longtime board member scheduled a private meeting with Preston. He warned that the company's reputation was becoming too closely tied to emotional agendas. He suggested it was time to quietly scale things back, Preston listened without interrupting. Then he asked for the most recent quarterly numbers. Profits up, investor confidence strong, public perception better than ever. The board member hesitated, unsure where to pivot. Preston simply nodded. If the numbers are solid, then what exactly are you afraid of? The man didn't answer, because the discomfort wasn't financial, it was symbolic. And in rooms built on hierarchy, symbols weighed more than balance sheets. Meanwhile, the project continued to expand. In just over 8 weeks, it had launched 3 full training sessions, connected dozens of women to legal and psychological support services, and begun partnerships with education nonprofits. Marion made a point to learn every participant's name. She didn't sit behind desks or hide behind schedules. She showed up, sat beside them, asked questions. One cafeteria worker from the IT floor broke down in tears when she was offered tuition assistance. "For 20 years, I've only ever been 'Hey, miss' or 1 sec." Marion touched her shoulder and said, "From now on, your name is where everything starts. No platforms, no microphones, just presence." Outside the company walls, the perception of Marion also shifted. What had once been treated as a viral novelty was now discussed with respect. Editorials emerged about corporate responsibility. Case studies in leadership courses cited her work. Some tried to paint her as a symbol. She refused. Her bag was still the same one she carried before anyone knew her name. She declined all TV appearances. "I'm not here to be a mascot. I'm here to make something better." The more she turned away from attention, the more credible her presence became. Even skeptics in the company began to change, not because they liked her, but because they couldn't argue with the results. On a quiet Friday evening, Preston descended to the 3rd floor unannounced. Marion was at her desk, surrounded by drafts, diagrams, and workshop schedules. She looked up calmly. "Here as the boss, or just curious?" He didn't pretend. "Today, just someone who wants to see what you're building." She didn't invite him to sit, but she didn't shut him out either. She showed him the progress reports, the goals, the timelines, and finally, a proposal for extending the program to other companies within the group. Preston reviewed it in silence. When he finished, he placed the folder on her desk. "If you want to run with this, you have my backing." Marion nodded, no smile, no ceremony. And as he turned to leave, she added, "But don't expect me to ask for permission to do what's right." Preston paused, met her eyes, and gave a single firm nod. In that moment, there was no CEO, no subordinate, just 2 people who understood exactly what they were doing, and neither one looked away. The impact of the initiative led by Marion had begun to spill far beyond the walls of the Hawthorne Group. Over the following weeks, the company's headquarters became a recurring topic in radio interviews, op-eds, and public forums that had rarely shown interest in corporate social programs before. What drew the most attention wasn't the structure of the initiative itself, but the woman at the heart of it. A former janitor, once invisible in the halls of the same building, was now spearheading a movement that directly affected hundreds of employees. The media scrambled to understand how such a shift had unfolded with no PR rollout, no press conferences, and no marketing blueprint. Marion, true to her convictions, continued to decline invitations for cover stories or personal profiles. It was Eleanor who handled the press, firmly, clearly. This wasn't a rebranding campaign. We simply decided to recognize someone who had always been there. Inside the company, however, the growing momentum began to spark a more explicit discomfort. A handful of executives organized a private lunch, far from the boardroom, to discuss the direction the company was taking. The word control was mentioned more than once. Some insisted leadership needed to refocus on global expansion, on attracting investment, on managing risk in volatile markets. Marion's increasing influence among staff and support teams was described as a distraction. She doesn't understand the corporate game. Maybe she's a good story, but stories don't sustain long-term strategy, said one of the older board members, his tone tinged with condescension. What he didn't realize was that an intern at the table had recorded the entire conversation. Within days, the audio circulated through internal group chats, accompanied by messages of outrage and disbelief. Marian didn't respond with memos or official statements. She called her team together and reminded them of the project's core mission: to create real, lasting change for real people. She made it clear she would continue meeting with employees face-to-face, resolving issues case by case, adjusting the structure where needed. "If I have to do this outside the company walls, I will," she said. Her words spread through chat groups, shared like fire. Women in the company began organizing what they called a circle of support, a space to talk, listen, and imagine new possibilities together. The initiative, once born out of crisis management, was now a growing force of internal transformation. Quiet, relentless, real. Preston watched it all from a careful distance. He understood that any sudden involvement from him could be seen as interference, so he positioned himself as a protector of the space, not its architect. In meetings with senior leadership, he repeatedly affirmed that the company's performance remained strong. Profits were steady, reputation at an all-time high, and shareholder confidence undisturbed. "If we're bothering the status quo, maybe we're finally doing something right," he said once during a board meeting. That phrase was later quoted in a business journal as a sign of a new kind of leadership, grounded, ethical, unafraid of recalibrating the system. For the first time in years, Preston's name was appearing not just as the head of an empire, but as someone who had known when to step aside and let others rise. On the ground, Marian's program began attracting attention from other branches of the company, especially those operating in more socially divided areas. A proposal to create localized support hubs, independently managed but connected to the main initiative, was not only approved but celebrated by several investors. Ironically, the same idea had been dismissed years earlier when proposed by outside consultants. The difference now was undeniable. This proposal came from within. It was lived, not theorized, and that gave it weight. Eleanor, in a rare moment of reflection, commented quietly, "Sometimes it takes a real story to remind the company what reality looks like." That Friday, after another intense week, Marian was called to Preston's office. She entered to find he wasn't alone. Seated beside him was a representative from an international foundation, studying documents with quiet focus. After the presentation ended, the woman turned to Marian and asked, "Have you considered turning this into an independent network, something that could partner with other companies, even internationally?" Marian listened carefully. The idea was bold, full of complex implications. She didn't rush her response. Instead, she thanked the visitor, collected her notes, and said calmly, "I don't yet know what this is going to become, but I do know it's not just my decision anymore." And with that, she made it clear what had started as a company's response to bad press had become a collective movement, one no individual, no matter how powerful, could stop. Months later, Marian's name still echoed through the halls of the Hawthorne Group, but it no longer raised eyebrows. What had once caused unease or skepticism had become embedded in the company's fabric. The program that began as a response to a corporate scandal had evolved into a formal arm of social engagement, now operating through 5 regional branches and supported by dozens of external partnerships. Each site was led by a local coordinator, always someone from the community it served. Marianne had insisted on that from the beginning. Only those who live a reality can lead its transformation. She no longer appeared at every event. She didn't, and have to. Her name alone opened doors, inspired trust, and ensured that support was granted out of respect, not pity. The movement grew not like a trend, but like something that takes root. quietly, permanently. Inside the central office, Preston remained at the helm of strategic decisions. He negotiated contracts, spoke at international summits, and kept the company among the most profitable on the continent. The association between his public image and the initiative wasn't forced, nor was it used as leverage. Occasionally, a photo was published, a brief comment made, or a quote included in a speech. But his stance was consistent. He valued what had been built and kept enough distance to ensure it wasn't his spotlight. At a round table with fellow CEOs, someone asked about the company's direction. He simply said, "Today, our reputation is tied to something beyond profit. That doesn't weaken us. It makes us relevant." The line circulated through business forums, seen by some as a mark of modern leadership. Preston, however, continued his days the same way, measured, reserved, and unshaken in his discipline. Eleanor, meanwhile, had become a visible bridge between two worlds. She was now the company's internal compass, balancing hierarchy with transformation. It was she who negotiated across departments, who mediated between top leadership and grassroots demands. Her ability to navigate both spaces made her indispensable. Some weeks, she spent more time in meetings with Marion than with the board, and she made no attempt to hide it. "My loyalty lies with what works. And what's working right now is what we're building together," she said during a discussion with Labor Department officials. That remark sealed a governmental endorsement of the model. For the first time in decades, a program born inside a private company was influencing public policy, and doing so without applause, trophies, or staged announcements. Marion turned down every offer for promotion. She didn't want to become a director, advisor, or figurehead. Her desk remained on the third floor, small and unpretentious. Her hours were consistent, her presence steady, especially in welcome meetings with newly added participants. She preferred to sit in a circle rather than stand at a podium. "My job is to make sure no one feels alone in this," she often said. Over time, she began compiling an internal manual, practical, detailed, and based entirely on real-life cases. It became a reference across all branches. A journalist who requested an interview received only one sentence in reply: "Don't write about me, write about the ones who've never been heard." Attached to the email was a photo of a community meeting led by a former custodial worker, now promoted to site coordinator. A new facility opened just outside the city in what used to be an abandoned municipal office. With logistical support from the Hawthorne Group and direct coordination from Eleanor, the building had been renovated and repurposed as a training and support center for women in vulnerable situations. The name chosen didn't reference the company or Marion. It simply read on the door, "Rebuilding Space." The rooms were arranged with care, designed not only for function but for dignity. Classes, legal advice, therapy, and skill-building workshops. No ribbon was cut. No cameras were invited. Marion arrived at dusk, walked quietly through the center, spoke with the first group of women to enroll, and left without ceremony. The work was underway. That was enough. Later that evening, Marion walked past reception carrying folders and a folded jacket. Preston was coming down from a meeting on the second floor, phone in hand, face focused. When he saw her, he paused, just long enough for their eyes to meet. She offered a small nod. He returned it with a subtle, unwavering look. No words were exchanged. None were needed. What existed between them wasn't closeness nor romantic tension. It was something forged by action, the kind of mutual respect that emerges only when two people choose to do what's hard, what's right, and understand that neither will be the same afterward. Marion exited first. Preston watched for a moment longer before his assistant called him back. Outside, the city kept moving, and even if no one saw it, much had already changed. The end. So what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time.